Hi everybody, Shariq, regulated Canadian immigration consultant, back with another video on Canadian immigration. In today's video, we're going to discuss the eligibility requirements for Canadian citizenship application. There are 5 major requirements that you need to fulfill before you can submit or plan on submitting your citizenship application for Canada. For details on each of these requirements, watch the video till the end. Welcome back. So as I mentioned that in today's video, we're going to discuss the eligibility requirements for Canadian citizenship application. As I mentioned earlier, there are 5 major requirements. Each has certain exceptions to it, and we'll discuss all of these one by one. The 5 major requirements that are there. First, you need to be a permanent resident of Canada. Number 2, you need to have lived in Canada for 3 out of last 5 years. Third, you must have filed taxes for certain years within your stay in Canada. You need to pass a citizenship test. There are certain exceptions to it. We'll discuss them. And lastly, you have to prove your language abilities in the 2 official languages that Canada has, English and French. So you need to fulfill the language requirements in either of the 2. So either English or French. Now let's have a look at all of these one by one. So the first requirement is that you must be a permanent resident of Canada when you submit your Canadian citizenship application. In Canada, a lot of people move as workers, like on a work permit or as students. So they study and then they become a temporary worker and then they become a permanent resident. To apply for your Canadian citizenship, you must have attained the status of permanent resident. Say for instance, you moved to Canada on a study permit, you lived in Canada for 4 years doing your bachelor's as a student, then you moved on to the status of a work permit holder and you stayed in Canada as a work permit holder for say 2 or 3 years. So it's been say 7-8 years already, but regardless of the fact as to how long you have been in Canada, you're not eligible to apply for the Canadian citizenship unless that you attain the permanent resident status. So sometimes people think that if they've spent say 8, 9, 10 years in Canada on a legal status, be it a temporary status, they can apply for citizenship, but that's not the case. You must be a permanent resident of Canada before you can submit your citizenship application. If your permanent resident status is under review or it's being revoked and you meet all other requirements that I'll discuss in a bit, you still cannot submit your citizenship application. So your PR status has to be intact at the time that you submit your citizenship application. The next requirement is that you need to have lived in Canada for a total of 3 years within a period of last 5 years. So this totals out to be 1095 days. So you have to meet a residency obligation, and whenever you submit your application, from that particular date, the Department of Immigration is going to look at 5 years before that and calculate if you have a total residency within Canada of 1095 days. Now this residency could be in one go, it could be accumulated over a period of time. So say for instance, within last 5 years, you were in Canada for a complete 2 years and then you went away for a whole year and then you came back. That's all fine as long as you've been in Canada for 1095 days in total in last 5 years. That's all good. Now some people might have a question at this, that they've only been in Canada for last 4 years, like they became a permanent resident 4 years, but they do meet the 1095 days because they've been in Canada, they've only gone out on few occasions. So if you are able to meet the 1095 days within a lesser time period, like less than 5 years, that's perfectly fine as well. If you have been in Canada on a temporary status, like you were a work permit holder or you were a study permit holder, your stay in Canada on a legal temporary residence could also be used towards your citizenship application. But the maximum that you can have is 365 days from that. And the temporary resident status that you had for every 2 days that you stayed in Canada, that's counted as one. Over here, I'd like to mention one thing, that sometimes there are people who are not able to ascertain their exact days when they were in Canada or they left Canada as they've been traveling. Sometimes people have jobs where there's a lot of frequent travel, and a lot of times in Canada, when you enter having your PR card, the officers won't do any stamping on your passport. And if you're going to your own home country, I'll give you an example of Pakistan, like if you have a NICOP, or if you're traveling to US for that matter, they might not stamp your passport. And you are in a position where you don't know as to how many days exactly you've been in Canada. Or when you submit your application, you don't really know the details, what to put, because you have to mention your travel history in the citizenship application. In that case, what we've done in the past with our clients is obtain ATIP notes, because through ATIP notes, you are able to ascertain your exact days that you entered Canada or you exited Canada. So the next requirement is that you must have submitted your tax returns for at least 3 out of last 5 years. Depending all the years that you were a resident in Canada for tax purposes, you should be filing your taxes. Even if you don't have income, sometimes there is a case that there is a couple who's in Canada, one of the persons out of that couple is working full time, the other one is not working, so they don't have any income. But a piece of advice is that if you're a permanent resident in Canada, or even for that matter, a temporary resident, and you ultimately wish to apply for Canadian citizenship, you should file your taxes even if it is zero income. So for citizenship application, you are required to provide proof that you have filed your tax returns for last 3 out of the 5 years. For people who might have missed out on submitting their tax returns, but now want to submit their citizenship application, you could file your taxes for the previous year that you missed, because if you don't do that, you don't meet the basic eligibility and your citizenship application could be returned. The next requirement for Canadian citizenship grant is that you must pass a citizenship test. Now, there is an exception if you are somebody who is less than 14 years or above 54 years. In that case, you have a waiver from this requirement. In most instances, if you're above 54, during your citizenship application process, you will be called for an interview. But for everybody who's between 54 to 14, you are required to have a citizenship test done. Now, this citizenship test is basically, there are 20 questions in it. A lot of times it's done online, or you go to one of the centers and you do it. And they check your understanding of very basic information about Canada and the Canadian society. So Canadian history, Canadian political system, Canadian economics, Canadian geography. And you are required to score 15 out of the 20 questions that you attempt. If you score 15 or above, you pass the test. Keep in mind that you are not required to take this test before your citizenship application. Like in case of residency obligation, you can only submit your citizenship application once you've met the 1095 days. But citizenship test is done once you submit your application, you get the application number, and then they call you for the citizenship test. But unless you clear this, you pass this test, you cannot proceed further. If you fail the test, you are given a second opportunity where you can do the test. If you fail the test even the second time, then you have to have an interview with an immigration officer who's going to sit down with you and assess your ability about the understanding of Canadian society in general. And you have to pass that. If you don't, then at this stage, your citizenship application will not proceed further. The last requirement for Canadian citizenship eligibility is to meet the language requirements. Now, for everybody who is between 14 to 54 years of age, they are required to meet it through various means. For people who are less than 14 or people who are above 54, they get a waiver on it. Canada has two official languages, English and French. So you need to meet the language requirement for any one of them. As most of the immigrants to Canada are English speaking, so as long as you are able to meet the language requirements in English, you're all fine. For meeting the language requirements, there are various different means that are there. The most commonly used is that you sit for a standardized language test. Like if you're looking at meeting the English language requirement, you can do that by taking a test like IELTS or CILPIP, and you have to attain a certain score. Now, usually this is just CLB4, which is very easy to get, and they only focus on two modules, which is your ability to speak and your ability to listen. There are certain other alternatives as well. Like if you've studied in an English speaking country and you can provide that proof, that fulfills. Or when you came to Canada, you did one of the language courses that are offered for new immigrants, that fulfills the requirement. So there's a whole list of alternatives other than the language ability test. Also keep in mind that if you took your IELTS or CILPIP or a French TCF or TEF language exam many years ago, like 5, 6, 7 years ago when you applied for your permanent residency, it doesn't matter that it is already beyond its expiry date of 2 years. As long as you have the proof of that language test, you can provide that and meet the requirements for citizenship language. So that's all the eligibility requirements that are there for Canadian citizenship application. I hope I've been able to provide some valuable information to you, and you now know if you may make the basic eligibility for Canadian citizenship. If you have any questions and queries, you can post that in the comment section. And for anybody who needs professional help with this Canadian citizenship application or anything else, you can book a consultation session with myself, and I can provide you guidance on Canadian immigration in the capacity of a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and help you navigate your way through the difficult questions and queries that Canadian immigration at times has. With this, I'll ask for leave. A lot of prayers for yourself and your families. Take very good care, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye-bye.